London, 1888. A city of shadows, sin, and secrets. By day, the heart of an empire. By night, a hunting ground. And in the narrow alleys of Whitechapel, a phantom was waiting. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, a name whispered in fear, a mystery that has haunted London for over a century. But to understand the terror, you must first understand the world he stalked. Welcome to Victorian London's East End. For many, this wasn't the grand city of Queen Victoria. It was a labyrinth of poverty, desperation, and darkness. Overcrowded slums, known as rookeries, were packed with families living in squalor. The air was thick with the smoke of coal fires and the stench of the Thames River. Gin palaces on every corner offered a cheap escape from a brutal reality. Work was scarce, and for many women in Whitechapel, survival meant selling the only thing they had left themselves. It was a dangerous life, lived on the edge, night after night. But in the autumn of 1888, something far more dangerous began to stir in the gaslit fog. A new kind of fear was about to descend upon these streets. A fear that would turn a desperate community into the backdrop for one of history's most infamous murder sprees. It all began on August 31st. In the pre-dawn gloom of Bucks Row, a cart driver on his way to work stumbled upon a bundle lying in a gateway. It was the body of Mary Ann Polly Nichols. Her throat had been brutally cut, and she had suffered other horrific injuries. The police were called, but they were unprepared for what they were dealing with. This was no ordinary street fight. The precision and savagery of the attack were chilling. Polly was a 43-year-old mother of 5, estranged from her husband, who had fallen on hard times. Like many women in Whitechapel, she moved between workhouses and cheap lodging houses, struggling to survive. On her last night, she had been turned away from her Das house because she couldn't afford the 4pence for a bed. She told the keeper, "I'll soon get my Das money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." She was never seen alive again. The press latched onto the story, and the name Whitechapel murderer began to spread. But this was only the beginning. The killer was just warming up. Just 8 days later, on September 8th, the killer struck again. In the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, the body of 47-year-old Annie Chapman was discovered. The brutality had escalated horrifically. The press went into a frenzy. Panic gripped the East End. Women were afraid to walk the streets, and vigilante groups, like the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, formed to patrol the area, frustrated by the police's apparent inability to catch the killer. The police, for their part, were overwhelmed. They were using investigative techniques that were primitive by today's standards. They interviewed hundreds of people, followed countless dead-end leads, and struggled to make sense of the few clues they had. Who was this phantom? A mad doctor with anatomical knowledge? A crazed butcher? A local lunatic? Every shadow held a suspect, and every man with a Gladstone bag fell under suspicion. The city was holding its breath, wondering not if, but when, he would strike again. 10 came to double event. In the early hours of September 30th, the killer claimed 2 victims in less than an hour. First, Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutfield's yard. It appeared the killer may have been interrupted, as her injuries were less severe than the previous victims. But he wasn't finished. Less than a mile away, and only 45 minutes later, the body of Catherine Edos was discovered in Mitre Square. The attack was frenzied and savage. The killer had even taken parts of her internal organs. This night marked a terrifying escalation, but it also provided the police with 2 of their most significant clues. A small piece of Catherine's apron, stained with blood, was found in a nearby doorway. Above it, scrawled in chalk on the wall, were the words, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was this a message from the killer? The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, ordered it washed away before it could be photographed, fearing it would incite anti-Semitic riots. It remains one of the most controversial decisions in the entire case. And then there was the letter. Just days before the double event, the Central News Agency received a taunting letter written in red ink. It began, "Dear Boss," and was signed with a name that would become legend. Jack the Ripper. The author mocked the police, boasted of his work, and promised to keep killing. At first, it was dismissed as a hoax, one of many pouring in. But after the murders of Stride and Dados, the letter was published, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting. Instead, it created a media sensation. The name Jack the Ripper was now on everyone's lips, cementing the killer's place in public consciousness. Was the letter genuine? We may never know, for sure. But it gave a face, or at least a name, to the faceless terror stalking London streets. The Ripper's reign of terror reached its gruesome peak on November 9th, a single room at 13 Miller's Court. A rent collector sent to get money from a young woman named Mary Jane Kelly made a horrifying discovery. Peeking through a broken window pane, he saw a scene of almost unimaginable carnage. Mary Kelly, just 25 years old, had been the victim of the most brutal attack yet. The killer had hours, undisturbed, in the privacy of her room. The mutilation was so extensive that she was barely recognizable. The city was aghast. How could a killer commit such an act and simply vanish? The murder of Mary Kelly was the final, brutal act in the Ripper's canonical killing spree. And then, silence. After the horror of Mary Kelly's murder, the killings stopped. Jack the Ripper, who had held an entire city in a grip of fear, simply vanished into the London fog from which he came. Why did he stop? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he die? Or did he simply move on? The police continued their investigation for years, but the case grew colder and colder. The official files were eventually closed, the mystery unsolved. But the legend was just beginning. The question of who was Jack the Ripper has captivated historians, criminologists, and amateur detectives for over 130 years. The list of suspects is long and varied. There was Montague Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher who was found drowned in the Thames shortly after the last murder. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in Whitechapel and suffered from severe mental illness. And Surin K. Osuski, also known as George Chapman, a poisoner who was hanged for murdering 3 of his wives. There are even more outlandish theories, pointing fingers at everyone from a famous painter to a member of the royal family. Each suspect has its proponents, and each theory has its holes. We've had supposed diaries, confessions, and even modern DNA analysis, but none have provided a definitive answer. The truth remains elusive, locked away in the past. The story of Jack the Ripper is more than just a whodunit. It's a chilling glimpse into a specific time and place. It exposed the dark underbelly of Victorian society, the vast gap between the rich and the desperately poor. The victims Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane were not just names in a mystery. They were real women, trapped by circumstance, whose lives ended in the most brutal way imaginable. Their stories are a tragic reminder of the forgotten people of history. The Ripper's legacy is a complex one. He became the prototype for the modern serial killer, and the investigation, for all its flaws, helped shape modern forensic science and police procedure. And so, the Phantom of Whitechapel remains at large, his identity lost to time. He is a ghost in the historical record, a question mark that will likely never be erased. The gaslit alleys may be gone, replaced by the modern streets of London, but late at night, when the fog rolls in from the Thames, it's easy to imagine him still out there, watching from the shadows. Picture this. London, 1888. But this isn't the London of grand palaces and afternoon tea you see in the movies. We're heading east, into the labyrinthine streets of Whitechapel. Imagine a place where the air is thick with the biting smell of coal smoke, cheap gin, and something heavier: desperation. This is the heart of the Victorian East End, a sprawling slum where life is a constant, grinding struggle for survival. The streets are a chaotic mess. Gas lamps cast long, dancing shadows, barely cutting through the perpetual fog, what they called the London particular. It's a pea souper, a thick yellow-gray blanket that muffles sound and hides secrets. Horse-drawn carts clatter over slick, muddy cobblestones, their drivers shouting to be heard over the din of the crowd. Every corner teems with people. You see women, their faces etched with worry, hawking wilted flowers or matches for a pit. By night, some of these same women will walk the same streets, selling the only thing they have left to sell. Look closer, into the alleyways. You'll see children, some no older than 5 or 6, with bare feet and soot-stained faces. They don't have a home to go to. Their beds are cold stone steps, or the damp earth under a bridge. They're called street Arabs, surviving by their wits, begging or stealing a crust of bread. This isn't just poverty, it's a level of destitution that's hard for us to even comprehend today. Overcrowding is rampant. Entire familias, sometimes multiple families, are crammed into a single, squalid room in a tenement building known as a rookery. These buildings are crumbling, disease-ridden fire traps. There's no running water, no sanitation. The stench from overflowing cesspits hangs in the air, a constant reminder of the cholera and typhoid that stalked the residents. Life is cheap here, and death is a familiar neighbor. In this world of shadows and struggle, the local police, the Metropolitan Police's H Division, patrol with tired eyes and weary feet. They know they're outnumbered and outmatched. The maze-like streets are impossible to police effectively. Crime is a part of the daily fabric of life. Petty theft, drunken brawls, domestic violence. The constables do what they can, but they are just a handful of men against an ocean of misery and lawlessness. They walk their beats, their lanterns swinging, always knowing that true danger lurks just beyond the pool of light. This was the world of Whitechapel, a place forgotten by progress, a pressure cooker of social ills, and it was into this dark, desperate corner of the world that a new kind of terror was about to be born. A terror that would give a name to the nameless fear that already haunted these streets. A name whispered in hushed, frightened tones in every pub and lodging house. A name that would become infamous, echoing through history for over a century. Jack the Ripper, the autumn of 1888. They called it the Autumn of Terror. It began on August 31st with the discovery of a woman named Mary Ann Nichols in Buckus Row. Her death was brutal, but it was only the beginning. The killer was methodical, yet frenzied. He targeted the most vulnerable women in this vulnerable society. Those who walked the streets at night, with no one to miss them, no one to protect them. Week after week, the horror escalated. Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Strive, Catherine Edos. Each murder was more savage than the last. The killer wasn't just taking lives, he was mutilating his victims with a terrifying, almost surgical precision. Panic gripped London. The newspapers, with their sensational headlines, fanned the flames of fear. The Whitechapel murders. They screamed. Who was this Fantin? A doctor with anatomical knowledge. A madman. A butcher. The theories were endless. He even taunted the police and the press, sending letters signed with his chilling moniker. The most famous one, the From Hell letter, was sent with half a human kidney, claiming it came from one of the victims. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman. Preserve it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice, it read, whether genuine or a cruel hoax. These letters cemented the legend of Jack the Ripper as a cunning, audacious monster who reveled in his own infamy. The police were helpless. Scotland Yard threw everything they had at the case. They conducted thousands of interviews, followed countless dead-end leads, and investigated hundreds of suspects. From local leather workers to foreign sailors, even to members of the royal family, no one was above suspicion. Yet, the Ripper was like a ghost. He slipped through the fog-shrouded streets, committed his horrific acts, and vanished without a trace, leaving behind only butchery and terror. The final canonical victim was Mary Jane Kelly on November 9th. The scene discovered in her small room at 30 Miller's Court was the most gruesome of all, a sight so horrific that it shook even the most hardened police officers and journalists. And then, silence. Just as suddenly as he had appeared, Jack the Ripper was gone. The murder stopped. The letters ceased. The fog of terror slowly began to lift, but it was replaced by a fog of mystery. Who was he? To this day, we don't know. The identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Was he Montague John Druitt, a barrister who was found in the Thames shortly after the last murder? Or, perhaps, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and hairdresser who was institutionalized for his severe mental illness. Maybe it was Surin Kalasowski, also known as George Chapman, a convicted poisoner who was hanged for murdering 3 of his wives. The list of suspects is long and compelling, but concrete proof has eluded investigators for over 130 years. But the story of Jack the Ripper is more than just a hoot. It's a stark reminder of the brutal realities of Victorian society. The murders threw a harsh spotlight on the appalling conditions in the East End, forcing the wealthy and powerful to confront the poverty and despair they had long ignored. In a strange, dark way, the Ripper's reign of terror brought about social change, leading to slum clearances and reforms that would eventually improve the lives of the people of Whitechapel. The shadows of Jack the Ripper still linger over the streets of London. His story continues to fascinate and horrify us, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of a civilized society, and the way one person's evil can be born from the desperation of a forgotten world. The name Jack the Ripper is more than just a name. It's a symbol of unsolved mystery, of Victorian horror, and of the dark, foggy streets where a monster once hunted. Camera opens on a dimly lit, foggy street, reminiscent of Victorian London. A clock tower chimes in the distance. Imagine London, 1888. The air is thick with coal, smoke, and fog. A labyrinth of gaslit alleys and shadowy corners where poverty and desperation are a way of life. In the heart of Whitechapel, a district teeming with life and struggle, a story is about to unfold that will chill the world to its core and create a legend that endures to this day. This isn't just a tale of crime. It's the birth of a mystery, the first chilling chapter in the reign of terror of the man we would come to know as Jack the Ripper. The date is August 31st. It's a Friday. In the pre-dawn darkness, a cart driver named Charles Cross is making his way down a quiet cobblestone street called Bucks Row. The gas lamps cast long, dancing shadows, making the familiar unfamiliar, the ordinary ominous. As he walks, something catches his eye, dark shape huddled against the gateway. At first, he might have dismissed it as just another soul sleeping rough, a common sight in this part of town. But as he draws closer, a sense of unease creeps in. He calls out to another man walking nearby, Robert Paul. Together, they approach the figure. What they find will be seared into their memories forever. It's the body of a woman, lying on her back. Her skirts raised almost to her waist. Her eyes are wide open, staring sightlessly into the murky sky. This is Mary Ann Nichols, a 43-year-old woman whose life of hardship has just met a brutal and terrifying end. At a glance, it looks like she's been attacked, perhaps a victim of a violent robbery. But the true horror is yet to be discovered. A local doctor, Dr. Rees, Ralph Llewellyn, is summoned to the scene. As he examines Mary Ann, the grim reality becomes sickeningly clear. Her throat has been slit not once, but twice, with such savage force that she was nearly decapitated. The cuts are deep, precise. But the depravity doesn't end there. The doctor uncovers something far more disturbing. Her abdomen has been brutally mutilated, cut open in a deliberate and shocking way. This wasn't a simple street crime. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. Something cold, calculated, and monstrous. News of the murder spreads through Whitechapel like wildfire. Fear, mixed with a morbid curiosity, grips the community. The police arrive, led by the experienced and determined Inspector Frederick Aberline of Scotland Yard. As he stands over Mary Ann's body, surrounded by the swirling London fog, he can feel the weight of what's to come. Aberline is a seasoned detective. He's seen the worst of humanity. But this feels different. The precision of the wounds, the lack of any struggle, the sheer brutality of the mutilation. He knows this isn't an act of passion or rage. It's methodical. It's a ritual. It's as if the killer was sending a message, a declaration carved into human flesh. The investigation begins immediately. Who was Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly, as she was known to her friends? Detectives delve into her life. They learn she was a mother of 5, separated from her husband, who had fallen on hard times. Like many women in Whitechapel, she lived a transient life, moving between workhouses and cheap lodging houses, earning just enough for a bed and a bit of gin. On the night of her death, she was turned away from her lodging house because she didn't have the fourpence for a bed. Her last known words were hauntingly prophetic. "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." She was last seen alive, walking the dark streets, just an hour before her body was discovered. The police are baffled. There are no witnesses, no weapon, and no clear motive. The killer had moved with ghostly silence and speed, committing his horrific act and vanishing back into the labyrinthine alleys of the East End. The press laches onto the story, splashing the gruesome details across the front pages. The Whitechapel murder, they call it. The public is horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Whispers start to circulate. Was this a one-time act of a madman, or was there a predator stalking the gaslit streets? The answer would come with terrifying speed. Just 8 days later, on September 8th, the city awakens to even more shocking news. In the backyard of a tenement building on Hanbury Street, another body is found, Annie Chapman. The pattern is sickeningly familiar. Her throat slit, her abdomen mutilated with even greater ferocity. This time, the killer had removed her uterus with surgical precision. The whispers in London turned to screams. This is no longer a single murder. It's a series. A phantom is haunting Whitechapel, a killer who preys on the most vulnerable women of the night. He is silent, he is brutal, and he is methodical. The press gives him a name that will echo through history, a name synonymous with terror and mystery. Jack the Ripper. Inspector Aberline and his men are now facing an unprecedented challenge. They are hunting a new kind of monster, a serial killer before the term even existed. They're battling not just a cunning murderer, but also the city itself. Whitechapel, with its maze of unlit courts and alleyways, its transient population, and its code of silence, is the perfect hunting ground. The killer can appear and disappear like a ghost in the fog. The murder of Marianne Nichols was the opening act. It was the moment a shadow fell over London, a shadow that would deepen with each subsequent victim. It marked the beginning of the Autumn of Terror, a period of intense fear and paranoia that would forever change the city. The search for the killer would become one of the most famous manhunts in history, a puzzle that remains unsolved to this day. Who was he? A doctor? A butcher? A madman? We may never know for sure, but it all started here, in the pre-dawn darkness of Bucks Row, with a woman named Polly Nichols, the first victim, whose death signaled the arrival of a nightmare. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. The story of Jack the Ripper is a dark but fascinating part of our history. Have you ever wondered how a killer becomes a legend? How a name, whispered in the dark, can haunt a city for over a century? It's not just about the crimes, as horrifying as they are. It's about the story, the myth, the terror that takes on a life of its own. And for the most infamous serial killer in history, that story began not with a scream in a dark alley, but with a few words, scrawled in blood-red ink. This is the story of the letters from hell, and the birth of Jack the Ripper. Imagine London, 1888. The air is thick with coal, smoke, fog, and something else. Fear. In the impoverished district of Whitechapel, a string of brutal murders has gripped the city. The victims are all women, all living on the margins of society. The attacks are savage, leaving the police baffled and the public in a state of utter panic. Newspapers are having a field day, with headlines screaming from every corner, each more sensational than the last. The city is a pressure cooker, and everyone is demanding answers. Who is this monster stalking the streets? The police, led by Scotland Yard, are under immense pressure. They're chasing shadows, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, and following countless dead-end leads. They have no forensic science as we know it today. No DNA, no fingerprint data. All they have are their wits, their notebooks, and a growing sense of desperation. The killer is a ghost, a phantom who slips through their fingers time and time again. Then, on September 27th, something happens that changes everything. A letter arrives at the Central News Agency, a major press organization of the day. It's not an anonymous tip. It's a taunt. A challenge. A message directly from the killer himself. The envelope is ordinary, but its contents are anything but. Written in bold, red ink, The letter is both arrogant and chilling. It begins with a casual, almost mocking salutation. "Dear boss." The author immediately scoffs at the police investigation. "I keep on hearing the police have caught me," he writes, "but they won't fix me just yet." It's a direct jab at the authorities, a boast that he is smarter, more cunning than anyone pursuing him. The letter continues, its tone growing darker, more menacing. The author confesses his hatred, his twisted mission. "I am down on horse," he declares, using the derogatory term for the vulnerable women he targeted, "and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled." The word choice is deliberate, brutal. Ripping. It's a graphic, visceral description of his horrific acts, a word that would soon be seared into the public consciousness. He talks about his work, about the grand work he had been doing, and his frustration that the police let him get away. He even promises to send the police a trophy from his next victim. "I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly." It's a terrifying glimpse into a mind devoid of empathy, one that sees murder as a game, a form of gruesome entertainment. And then, at the very end, he signs off. Not with his real name, of course, but with a new one, a name that would echo through history, a name that would become synonymous with terror itself. He signs the letter. "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The moment that name was published, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Jack the Ripper, it was catchy, it was sinister. It was perfect. The newspapers ran with it, plastering it across every front page. Suddenly, the nameless dread stalking Whitechapel had a persona. He wasn't just a killer anymore. He was a character, a boogeyman. The public, starved for a narrative, devoured it. The name stuck. The legend was born. This letter, forever known as the Dear Boss letter, was a stroke of evil genius. Whether it was genuinely from the killer or a twisted journalistic hoax, we are ye to that. But its effect was undeniable. It transformed the case from a local crime spree into an international media sensation. The killer was no longer just a man, he was a brand. But it didn't stop there. Just 3 days after the Dear Boss letter was received, another piece of mail arrived. This time, it was a simple postcard, also addressed to the Central News Agency. It was written in the same hand, in the same red ink. It was a follow-up, a chilling sequel. This postcard, nicknamed the Saucy Jackie, was even more brazen. The author referred to the double murder that had just occurred, proving he was up to date with his own horrific work. "You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow," he was toying with them, enjoying the chaos he had created. He again signed off with his now famous moniker, reinforcing the brand he had built. The city of London descended further into madness. Was tease real. It was the killer actually communicating with the press, taunting the police, and playing a deadly game with the entire city. The letters were published, their contents dissected in every pub and parlor. Handwriting experts were consulted. Theories flew wildly. The name Jack the Ripper was on everyone's lips, a whisper of fear in the foggy London night. And then came the most gruesome delivery of all. In mid-October, George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of local citizens who had banded together to patrol the streets and help the police, received a small package. The postmark was from London. Inside the cardboard box, nestled in what appeared to be cotton wool, was a piece of a human kidney. Along with this horrifying object was another letter. The tone was different this time, cruder, less educated, almost primal. It began with the ominous words, "From hell." The author claimed to have fried and eaten the other half of the kidney he was sending. "It was very nice," he wrote, the misspelling only adding to the horror. He ended with a taunt. "Catch me when you can." This letter, now known as the From Hell letter, is considered by many investigators to be the most likely to be authentic. The victim from whom the kidney was supposedly taken, Catherine Adawas, had indeed had one of her kidneys removed by the killer. Could a hoaxer have known this detail? It was a piece of information that wasn't widely publicized. The police were terrified. The public was beyond panic. The Ripper wasn't just a killer and a letter writer. He was a monster who desecrated his victims and sent pieces of them through the mail. So, the big question remains. Were these letters genuine? For over a century, this has been one of the most hotly debated aspects of the Ripper case. Let's break it down. Many investigators at the time, and many researchers today, believe that the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard were elaborate hoaxes, most likely created by a journalist to sell more newspapers. The style is theatrical, the language sensational. It feels almost asterisk to asterisk perfect, as if crafted specifically for a headline. In an era of fierce competition between newspapers, faking a letter from the killer to boost circulation is not out of the realm of possibility. If it was a hoax, it was the most successful one in history. The From Hell letter, however, is a different story. The specific detail about the missing kidney gives it a chilling credibility that the others lack. While not definitive proof, it's a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. Could the killer have written this one letter, while the others were the work of copycats or opportunists? It's a compelling theory. Ultimately, we may never know for certain. The identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery, and the authenticity of his supposed letters is a mystery within that mystery. But what we do know is the immense power these letters held. They gave a face, or at least a name, to the terror. They fueled the media frenzy and turned a series of horrific crimes into an enduring dark legend. The killer stopped as suddenly as he began. The murders ceased. The letters stopped coming. The ghost of Whitechapel vanished back into the fog from whence he came, leaving behind only 5 canonical victims, a city scarred by fear, and a name that would never be forgotten. A name born from a few chilling words written in red ink. Jack the Ripper. September 30th, 1888. The date looms large in the grim history of London, a night forever stained by a shadow known only as Jack the Ripper. This wasn't just another night of terror in Whitechapel. This was the night the killer escalated his gruesome work, committing not one, but 2 horrific acts in a single hour. It would come to be known as the double event. Imagine the city. Gaslights flicker against the thick, swirling fog. The cobblestone streets, slick with rain and refuse, echo with the hurried footsteps of people desperate to get indoors. Fear is a tangible thing, a cold dread that has gripped the East End for weeks. A killer is on the loose, preying on the most vulnerable women of the district, and no one knows who he is or when he will strike next. Our story begins just before 1 a.m. in a dark, narrow passage called Dutfield's Yard, off Burner Street. A man named Louis Diemschatz, the steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club, is returning home, guiding his pony and cart into the yard. But his pony suddenly shies, refusing to go further. In the pitch-black darkness, Diemschatz prods at an object on the ground with his whip, thinking it's just a bundle of rags, or perhaps someone sleeping off a long night. He tries to lift it, but it's too heavy. Striking a match, the small flame illuminates a scene of pure horror. Lying on the ground is the body of a woman. Her throat has been cut with a swift, deep incise, and a small stream of blood is still flowing from the wound, pooling on the cobblestones. This is Elizabeth Stride. She is the Ripper's 3rd canonical victim, but her murder is strangely different from the others. While her throat is fatally wounded, her body is otherwise untouched. There are no other mutilations. Panique erupts. Diemschatz raises the alarm, and people pour out of the club. The police arrive within minutes. The doctor who examines Elizabeth Stride determines that she has been dead for only a very short time, perhaps mere moments. The killer was likely interrupted. The sudden arrival of Diemschatz and his noisy cart probably scared him off before he could complete his ghastly ritual. This theory that the killer was interrupted becomes terrifyingly plausible just a short time later, because the night is far from over. The shadow that fled Dutfield's Yard wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Frustrated, enraged, he melts back into the labyrinthine streets of Whitechapel, seeking another opportunity, another victim to satisfy his bloodlust. The clock ticks closer to 2 a.m., less than a mile away. In a dark corner of Mitre Square, the second act of this horrifying drama is about to unfold. This area is a small, secluded square, enclosed by warehouses and dimly lit. It's patrolled by a police constable, P.C. Edward Watkins, every 12 to 14 minutes. At 1:30 a.m., he walks his beat through the square and sees nothing out of the ordinary. Everything is quiet. But when he returns at 1:44 a.m., The scene has changed dramatically. In the darkest corner of the square, he discovers another body. This is Catherine Eddowes. What has happened to her is beyond comprehension. Unlike Elizabeth Stride, Catherine has suffered unimaginable violence. Her throat has been cut so savagely that her head is almost severed. Her face is mutilated, her body extensively and brutally disfigured. Her internal organs have been removed and placed by her shoulder. It is a scene of utter depravity, a frenzy of violence that defies human understanding. The contrast between the two crime scenes is stark and chilling. Elizabeth Stride, found with only her throat cut, suggests the killer interrupted. Catherine Eddowes, found less than an hour later and a short walk away, bears all the horrific hallmarks of the Ripper's previous work, but amplified to a new level of savagery. It's as if the killer denied his full, gruesome ritual with Stride, unleashed all his pent-up fury on Eddowes. The police are now certain they're dealing with a single perpetrator for both crimes. The double event has cemented the Ripper's reputation as a monster of unparalleled cunning and brutality. But the night held one more secret. One more piece of the puzzle that would baffle and divide investigators for over a century. As police scoured the area around the Eddowes murder scene, their search led them to a street called Gulston Street. Here, in the doorway of a tenement building, they made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Lying on the ground was a piece of a blood-soaked apron. It was later confirmed to have been cut from the apron Catherine Eddowes was wearing. The killer had taken a trophy, a souvenir of his ghastly work. This was a crucial piece of evidence, a direct link to the murder, but it was what was found above the apron fragment that truly stunned the officers. Scrawled in chalk on the wall of the doorway was a message, a cryptic and unsettling sentence. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." What did it mean? Was this a genuine clue left by the killer himself? The spelling of Jews was unusual. Was it a deliberate misspelling, a code, or simply the work of an uneducated man? And the message itself, was it an attempt to frame the local Jewish population, who were already facing significant prejudice and suspicion in the East End? Or was it a more complex, double negative statement? Perhaps meaning the opposite of what it seemed. The senior officer at the scene, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, arrived just before dawn. He faced a monumental decision. The message was inflammatory. Tensions in Whitechapel were already at a boiling point. Anti-Semitic sentiment was rife, and Warren feared that if the public saw the writing, it could spark violent riots against the Jewish community. The sun was rising, and soon the streets would be filled with people on their way to work. Torn between preserving a potential clue and preventing a potential riot, Warren made a controversial choice. He ordered the message to be erased. He had it photographed, but the technology of the day was poor, and the photograph, if it was even successfully taken, has never been found. Before the sun was fully up, a sponge was taken to the brick wall, and the chalk words were wiped away forever. That decision has been debated endlessly ever since. Did Sir Charles Warren destroy the single most important clue in the entire Jack the Ripper case? Was this a message directly from the killer? A glimpse into his twisted mind, now lost forever? Or was it merely a piece of unrelated anti-Semitic graffiti? A coincidence that had nothing to do with the murder? We will never know for sure. The truth of that night, like the identity of the killer himself, was erased, washed away by a sponge and swallowed by the perpetual London fog. The double event marked the peak of the Ripper's reign of terror. It showcased his audacity, his brutality, and his uncanny ability to evade capture. The bloody apron fragment and the ghostly message on Gulston Street remain two of the most tantalizing and frustrating mysteries in criminal history. The events of September 30th, 1888, left London with more questions than answers, and a legacy of fear and fascination that endures to this day. Start of narration: the year is 1888. The season is autumn, but in the heart of London, a different kind of chill has descended. They call it the Autumn of Terror, and for the people of Whitechapel, it is a living nightmare. Imagine the city, shrouded in a perpetual fog, the gas lamps casting long, dancing shadows that seem to hide unspeakable things. This isn't just a story. For a few terrifying months, this was reality. Every night, as dusk settles, the streets transform. The air, thick with the smell of coal smoke and fear, crackles with a nervous energy. Crowds begin to gather. Ordinary men, their faces grim in the flickering light of torches and lanterns. They are not an official police force. They are fathers, husbands, and sons, banding together to form vigilance committees. They patrol the labyrinthine alleys and courts, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, convinced they can succeed where the police have failed. They are hunting for a phantom, a monster who stalks the darkness. They are hunting for the man they called Jack the Ripper. In the pubs, the atmosphere is just as tense. The usual boisterous laughter is replaced by hushed, anxious whispers. Men huddle over their pints, their eyes darting towards the door every time it creaks open. They trade theories, rumors, and morbid jokes to mask their own growing dread. He could be any one of us, one might say, trying for a laugh that catches in his throat. He could be sitting right here, in this very room. The joke falls flat. No one is truly laughing. The fear is a palpable presence, an unwelcome guest at every table. Every stranger is a potential suspect. Every shadow, a potential threat. For the women of Whitechapel, the fear is even more acute. Their world has shrunk. The once familiar streets, now a landscape of mortal danger. They never walk alone, especially after dark. They move in pairs or small groups, their hands clutching their shawls, not just against the autumn cold, but as a flimsy shield against an unseen predator. They walk quickly, their heads down, avoiding eye contact, their ears straining for the sound of following footsteps. Every corner turned as a risk, every dark doorway a potential ambush. The simple act of walking home has become a gamble with death. Meanwhile, at Scotland Yard, the investigation is descending into chaos. The pressure from the public, the press, and even the Queen herself is immense. Detectives, led by men like Inspector Frederick Aberley, are drowning in a sea of false leads and dead ends. They are working around the clock, fueled by black coffee and sheer desperation, sifting through a mountain of information that leads them everywhere and nowhere. The list of suspects grows daily, becoming a bizarre collection of London's citizens. Isit, a doctor, someone with surgical knowledge, who could perform such precise, horrific acts. The police question local physicians and medical students. Their black bags suddenly objects of suspicion. Or perhaps it's a butcher, someone accustomed to the grim reality of their trade. Men who worked in the slaughterhouses, their aprons stained with a different kind of red, are brought in for questioning, their alibis scrutinized. The xenophobia simmering beneath the surface of Victorian society boils over. Anyone who is different is a target. Foreigners, particularly Eastern European immigrants living in the area, are viewed with deep suspicion. Their unfamiliar languages and customs make them easy scapegoats for a terrified populace. The police, desperate for a breakthrough, follow these leads, but they are chasing phantoms, fueled by prejudice rather than evidence. The theories become more and more outlandish. Could it be a member of the aristocracy, a gentleman killer indulging a dark, secret hobby? The idea of a toff slipping into the East End to commit these atrocities is both horrifying and strangely compelling to the public. Whispers even reach the highest echelons of society, entangling the royal family itself. Prince Albert, Victor, the Duke of Clarence, and grandson of Queen Victoria, becomes a subject of gossip. The notion is scandalous, absurd, yet in the grip of this collective madness, no theory is too wild to be considered. Each suspect seems more improbable than the last, a testament to the city's desperation. Every clue discovered only deepens the mystery. A piece of a victim's apron, a cryptic message chalked on a wall. Was it from the killer or a cruel prank? The infamous "from hell" letter, delivered with a piece of a human kidney, seems like a direct taunt, a message from the monster himself. But is it genuine? Forensic science is in its infancy. Handwriting analysis is subjective. The police are left to navigate a maze of hoaxes and genuine, but baffling, pieces of evidence. Each path they take, each clue they follow, leads to a brick wall, a dead end, and all the while, the killings continue. The phantom strikes again and again. Each new discovery sends a fresh wave of horror through the city. The newspapers, with their lurid headlines and graphic illustrations, fan the flames of panic. The name Jack the Ripper, born from a letter sent to a news agency, is now on everyone's lips. A name that embodies the terror of the unknown. He is faceless, nameless, a ghost who melts back into the London fog as quickly as he appears. The autumn of terror eventually subsides. The killings stop as mysteriously as they began, but the fear leaves a permanent scar on the city's soul. The case is never officially solved. Jack the Ripper is never caught. He vanishes, leaving behind a handful of victims, a city traumatized by fear, and a mystery that has endured for over a century. A dark legend woven into the very fabric of London. The fog has long since lifted, but the shadow of the Ripper still lingers. Today, we step back into the gaslit, fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, a city gripped by a terror unlike any it had ever known. We're going to explore the final, horrifying chapter in the saga of Jack the Ripper. A conclusion so brutal, so utterly devastating, that it has echoed through history for over a century. This is the story of his last known victim, a young woman whose gruesome end marked the terrifying climax and sudden disappearance of the world's most infamous serial killer. The autumn of 1888 was a season of dread in London's East End. The name Jack the Ripper was on everyone's lips, whispered in pubs, printed in blaring newspaper headlines, and feared in every dark alley. He had already claimed for, perhaps 5 victims, each murder more audacious than the last. The police were desperate, the public was petrified, and the killer himself was taunting the authorities with letters signed in blood-red ink. The city held its breath, wondering not if, but when he would strike again. And then came the night of November 8th. Our story centers on a young woman named Mary Jane Kelly. At just 25 years old, Mary Jane was known for her striking looks, fair skin, blue eyes, and beautiful auburn hair. Friends described her as lively and good-natured, despite the hardships she faced. Originally from Ireland, she had drifted to London, like so many others, in search of a better life. But circumstances had forced her into the precarious existence of a streetwalker in Whitechapel, the very heart of the Ripper's hunting ground. Unlike the Ripper's previous victims, who were typically older and killed outdoors, Mary Jane was young and had a place to call her own, a tiny, single room at number 13, Miller's Court, just off the notoriously squalid Dorset Street. It wasn't much. It was a 12-foot square space with a bed, a small table, and a fireplace. But it was her sanctuary, a private space away from the cold, dangerous streets. Tragically, this small room would become the stage for the Ripper's most depraved and shocking act of violence. The night of November 8th passed into the early morning of November 9th. It was the day of the Lord Mayor's show, a major, citywide celebration. Perhaps the Ripper knew the police would be stretched thin, their attention diverted by the parade. The last confirmed sighting of Mary Jane Kelly was around 2 a.m. She was seen talking to a man near her lodgings. He was described as stout, with a dark mustache, and wearing a respectable-looking long coat and a bowler hat. Was this Jack the Ripper? It's a question that has haunted investigators for decades. One of her neighbors, a woman named Mary Ann Cox, reported hearing Mary Jane singing the popular Irish ballad, "A Viola Plucked from My Mother's Grave," around 1 a.m. A little later, just before 4 a.m., another neighbor, Elizabeth Prater, who lived in the room directly above Mary Jane, was woken by her cat. She heard a faint cry of, "Oh, murder," but the sound was distant and quickly dismissed. In the crime-ridden streets of Whitechapel, such cries were disturbingly common, often just the sound of a drunken argument. Prater went back to sleep, unaware of the horror unfolding just a few feet below her. The morning of November 9th arrived, cold and gray. Mary Jane was behind on her rent, and her landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant, a man named Thomas Bowyer, to collect the money. It was around 10:45 a.m. Bowyer knocked on the door of number 13, Miller's Court. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still, only silence. He tried the door, but it was locked. Growing concerned, Bowyer walked around to the side of the room, to a window where a pane of glass was broken. He reached through the gap, pushed aside the thin curtain that served as a screen, and peered inside. What he saw would scar him for life. He recoiled in sheer terror, stumbling back into the courtyard, gasping for air. "My God," he stammered to McCarthy, who'd come to see what the delay was. The scene inside was so horrific, so beyond human comprehension, that Bowyer could barely form the words to describe it. The police were summoned immediately. When Inspector Walter Beck and Inspector Frederick Aveline, the lead investigator on the Ripper case, arrived, they too peered through the broken window. Even these hardened veterans of London's grimmest crime scenes were visibly shaken. They knew they couldn't disturb the evidence. They needed to get a clear look before entering. So, they made a decision. They sent for a photographer to capture the scene from the outside, preserving the initial state of the room before the door was broken down. It was a gruesome, unprecedented tableau. The room was a slaughterhouse. Blood was everywhere, splashed on the walls, pooled on the floor, soaking the bed, and on the bed lay what was left of Mary Jane Kelly. The mutilation was so extreme, so systematic that she was barely recognizable as a human being. It was clear that the killer had taken hours to perform his grotesque work, dissecting and arranging her remains with a chilling, almost surgical precision. Her heart was missing, taken from the scene. Other organs were placed deliberately around the room, some on the small bedside table, others tucked beneath her head. The flesh from her face and limbs had been stripped away. The scene was a portrait of absolute madness, a masterpiece of horror. The officers who finally broke down the door were met with an overwhelming stench. Several of them, men who had seen the worst the city had to offer, turned away, weeping or vomiting. It was an annihilation. The investigation began in earnest, but the killer had been meticulous. He had burned a large pile of women's clothing in the fireplace, likely to provide light for his gruesome task. The fire had been so intense that it had melted the spout of a kettle sitting nearby. This suggested he had been in the room for a significant amount of time, completely undisturbed. The question that baffled everyone was, how could such a prolonged and violent act have gone completely unnoticed? Miller's Court was a crowded, flimsy tenement. The walls were paved, yet no one heard a struggle. No one heard a scream, beyond that one faint cry. This led to a chilling theory that Mary Jane was asleep or unconscious when the attack began. Her life ended with a single, swift slash to the throat before the true horror commenced. The killer had the silence and privacy he had lacked in his previous outdoor murders. In the locked room of number 13, he was free to unleash the full, uninhibited extent of his depravity. This was his grand finale, his magnum opus. The aftermath was chaos. Panic turned to outright hysteria across London. The newspapers published every lurid detail, fanning the flames of public fear. The police were condemned for their failure, and theories ran rampant. Who could have done this? A doctor, a butcher, a madman. The level of anatomical knowledge displayed seemed to suggest someone with medical training, yet the sheer savagery pointed to something far more primal. And then, silence. After the butchery of Mary Jane Kelly, the murders stopped. The taunting letters ceased. Jack the Ripper, after holding the entire city of London in a state of terror for 3 months, simply vanished. He melted back into the fog from which he came, leaving behind a legacy of fear, 5 brutally murdered women, and a mystery that endures to this day. Why did he stop? Did he die? Was he imprisoned for another crime? Did he flee the country? Or, perhaps most disturbingly, did he simply satisfy his dark urges? Was the murder of Mary Jane Kelly the ultimate expression of his violent fantasy, the peak he could never surpass? We may never know for sure. The murder at Miller's Court wasn't just the end of the Ripper's reign of terror. It was a brutal punctuation mark on a dark chapter of history. It exposed the grim realities of poverty and desperation in Victorian London, and created a modern myth that continues to fascinate and horrify us. The identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time, and the horrifying scene in that small, locked room is the reason why. It was his final, terrible farewell. We're diving deep into a story that has haunted historians, baffled detectives, and captivated the public imagination for over a century. This is the tale of a shadow that fell over the city, a phantom whose name is whispered in fear even today. This is the story of Jack the Ripper. Our story begins in the autumn of 1888, in the heart of London's East End, Whitechapel. This wasn't the London of grand palaces and high society you might picture. Whitechapel was a labyrinth of poverty, desperation, and darkness. Overcrowded slums, known as rookeries, were packed with people living hand to mouth. The air was thick with the smoke of coal fires and the stench of the Thames. Gin palaces on every corner offered a cheap, fleeting escape from a harsh reality. It was a place where life was cheap, and survival was a daily struggle, especially for the women who walked its streets at night. It was in this desperate, fog-shrouded environment that a new kind of terror was born. On August 31st, the body of Marianne Nichols was discovered. Her death was brutal, shocking even the hardened residents and police of Whitechapel. But it was only the beginning. Just over a week later, on September 8th, another woman, Annie Chapman, was found murdered in a similar, horrific manner. Panic began to set in. The press, sensing a sensational story, dubbed the unknown assailant the Whitechapel murderer. The city was on edge, but the worst was yet to come. Then came the night of the double event. On September 30th, the killer struck twice in the same night, claiming the lives of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Edos, within an hour of each other. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a performance. The killer was taunting the police, growing bolder with each murder. It was after this night that a letter, allegedly from the killer himself, arrived at the Central News Agency. It was signed with a name that would be forever etched into the annals of crime: Jack the Ripper. The Dear Boss letter, as it came to be known, changed everything. Was it a genuine confession from the murderer, or a cruel hoax by a journalist looking to sell more papers? We may never know for sure, but the name stuck. The public was both terrified and fascinated. Jack the Ripper was no longer just a murderer. He was a character, a bogeyman, haunting the streets of London. The newspapers ran with it, printing every gruesome detail, every wild theory. The entire city, from the poorest slum dweller to the queen in her palace, was captivated by the hunt for this monstrous phantom. The police were in over their heads. Scotland Yard, led by figures like Inspector Frederick Aberlin, launched one of the biggest manhunts in history. They interviewed thousands of people, patrolled the dark alleyways, and followed up on every lead, no matter how bizarre. They used bloodhounds, they created early forms of criminal profiles, and they even dressed as women to act as decoys. Vigilante groups, like the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, formed to patrol the streets, frustrated by the police's inability to catch the killer. But Jack the Ripper was always one step ahead. He seemed to vanish into the fog as quickly as he appeared. The list of suspects grew longer by the day. It was a who's who of Victorian society and its underbelly. Was it a doctor or a surgeon? Someone with anatomical knowledge? Montague Yondruit, a barrister and schoolteacher found dead in the Thames, was an early suspect. What about a foreign sailor or a local butcher? Some theories pointed to royalty, others to famous artists. Men like Suerin Kalasowski, also known as George Chapman, a convicted poisoner, and Aaron a Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser and suffered from mental illness, have remained prime suspects for over a century. Each suspect has compelling arguments for and against them, creating a web of intrigue that remains untangled. The truth is, we simply don't have the evidence to definitively name any one of them. And then, on November 9th, 1888, the Ripper committed his most audacious and gruesome act. The victim was Mary Jane Kelly. Unlike the others, she was murdered indoors, in her small room on Miller's Court. The scene that greeted the police was beyond description, a level of brutality that sealed Jack the Ripper's reputation as a monster. It was a final, horrifying crescendo to his reign of terror. And after that, silence. The murders stopped as abruptly as they had begun. Jack the Ripper simply disappeared. Why did he stop? Did he die? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he leave the country? Or did he simply satisfy his dark urges and melt back into the crowd? This is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. The sudden end to the killings left a void, a question mark hanging over the city. The terror had passed, but the fear lingered, a cold shadow in the back of everyone's mind. The case was never officially closed. Jack the Ripper was never caught. Weeks pass. Then months. The fog returns to Whitechapel, but the fear never truly leaves. The newspapers eventually move on to other stories. The city heals, or at least it tries to, but the killer remains in the shadows of history, nameless, faceless, eternal. We've spent over 100 years trying to put a face to the name, to solve the puzzle he left behind. We analyze the evidence, debate the suspects, and walk the same streets he once did, hoping for a clue, a revelation. But maybe we're missing the point. He was not a ghost. He was not a supernatural monster. He was a man. He walked among the crowds. He breathed the same smog-filled air. He was one of us, and perhaps that's what makes him most terrifying of all. The idea that such darkness can exist not in some fantasy realm, but right here, hidden behind a normal face in the crowd. Jack the Ripper is more than just a historical true crime case. He's a symbol of the darkness that can lurk within humanity. A chilling reminder that some questions may never be answered. In the dark corners of London, time stands still. The cobblestones still remember the blood. The fog still hides the truth. Jack the Ripper was never caught, because maybe never left. This isn't just another historical documentary. Forget what you think you know about the Autumn of Terror in 1888. We've all heard the names, the dates, the gruesome details of the Whitechapel murders. A shadowy figure who preyed on the unfortunate, vanished into the gaslit alleys, and became a legend. A bogeyman. But what if the legend is more real than we ever imagined? For over a century, historians and ripperologists have debated his identity. Was he a doctor? A butcher? A member of the royal family? The list of suspects is long, filled with tantalizing clues and frustrating dead ends, but they all share one common assumption, that Jack was a man. A mortal man who lived, killed, and eventually died, taking his secret to the grave. This is where our story diverges. We're going to explore a chilling possibility, a theory that steps out of the realm of criminology and into the shadows of the supernatural. What if Jack the Ripper wasn't just a man? What if he was something else? Something that doesn't age, doesn't die, and still walks the streets of London today. This idea might sound like fiction, but it's rooted in some of the most baffling aspects of the case. Think about it. The Ripper's uncanny ability to appear and disappear without a trace. His seemingly superhuman strength, the almost ritualistic nature of his crimes. The police of the era were not just they were utterly bewildered, as if they were hunting a phantom. Let's start with the letters. The infamous From Hell letter, sent with half a human kidney, and the Dear Boss letter, which gave the killer his name. For years, they were dismissed as hoaxes, but recent forensic analysis suggests some of them could be genuine. The tone, the taunting, the sheer audacity, it doesn't sound like a common criminal. It sounds like a creature reveling in the chaos it creates, a being that fears no earthly authority. Now, consider the locations. Whitechapel. These aren't just old neighborhoods. They are places steeped in history, in poverty, in suffering. Energy lingers in such places. Occultists and paranormal investigators have long been drawn to these streets, reporting strange phenomena, disembodied whispers, sudden drops in temperature, and fleeting glimpses of a tall figure in a top hat and cloak. Coincidence, or is Ripperes? Dark energy so powerful that it has permanently scarred the very fabric of the city. We're going to talk to paranormal experts, psychics who have walked these streets and felt a presence they can only describe as ancient and malevolent. We'll delve into Victorian-era folklore, into tales of demonic entities and spiritual parasites that feed on fear and violence. Was the Autumn of Terror not just a string of murders, but a series of dark rituals designed to open a door that should have remained closed? This isn't about disrespecting the victims. Mirahan Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly were real women, and their tragedies are the dark heart of this story. But perhaps understanding the true nature of their killer is the only way to finally bring them peace. Let's re-examine the evidence through this new, terrifying lens. The surgical precision of the mutilations. Was it medical knowledge, or something more practiced, more ancient? The Ripper's disappearance after the final, most brutal murder of Mary Jane Kelly. Did he simply stop, Or did he complete his mission and retreat back to the shadows, waiting? There are modern accounts, unexplained disappearances and strange, unsolved crimes in London that have echoes of the Ripper's methods. Police dismiss them, but some who look closer see a pattern, a signature across time. A man matching the Ripper's description has been reported in photographs from the Blitz, at protests in the 60s, and even on CCTV footage in the 21st century. Always on the periphery. Always watching. A ghost in the machine of the modern world. Is it possible that Jack is an immortal, a vampire, or some other form of undying entity, cursed to walk the earth and periodically quench an insatiable thirst for blood? This theory would explain everything. His escape, his silence, his legend that refuses to die. He wasn't caught because he couldn't be. He didn't die because he can't. We will journey back to the cobbled streets of 1888, but we won't stay there. We will follow the trail of whispers and shadows through the 20th century and into our present day. We'll analyze historical records, police reports, and witness testimonies alongside psychic readings and paranormal evidence. The question is no longer who was Jack the Ripper. The question is who is. Jack the Ripper. What if the greatest mystery in the history of crime isn't a whodunit, but a what is it? Join me as we hunt for a killer who may still be hunting us. A killer who never left, who simply learned to hide in plain sight. He's moved on from the fog of the gaslight era to the digital haze of our own. The truth is out there, but it's not in the history books. It's in the cold spots of London's back alleys, in the static of a forgotten recording in the corner of your eye. Thank you for watching. If this exploration into the unknown intrigued you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history's darkest mysteries, and ring that notification bell. Let me know in the comments below, do you believe Jack the Ripper was a man or something more? Until next time, stay curious and be careful when you walk the old city streets at night. You never know who you might meet.